Santo Espíritu.
Fuck that, bro. The priest didn't even react because he's probably like, nah, this is some demon shit trying to test me to stop mass or whatever.
I wouldn't go the paranormal route. Maybe it was the actual like woman like.
That sounded like a woman to you?
Yeah.
Like literally right after that, they ended up like cutting the mass short because they were like, yeah, let's stop this. Maybe they got scared. They probably thought it was like you said, somebody being crazy or something.
Yeah.
Maybe others thought it was some paranormal.
Imagine being in church and then you hear that.
I know we talked about it in the IE and Friends podcast. Churches are actually scary, which they shouldn't be scary, but at night they give like this little eerie feeling.
I think what it is because of scary movies that we've seen and how basically they play on the stuff that we feel most.
Family checked into a cheap motel for their vacation, but as soon as they stepped into their room, a rancid odor hit them. It was thick, suffocating, and impossible to ignore. The husband immediately called the front desk, demanding to speak with the manager. "This room smells horrible," he complained. "We need another one." But the motel was fully booked. There was no other rooms available. Instead, the manager sent a maid to clean while the family left.
This TikToker was murdered by her ex-boyfriend. The same man that she made this video about on her TikTok. In August of 2024, 25-year-old Caitlin Lee was recording a TikTok video with one of her best friends. Caitlin, who was a mother of 3, was celebrating, having a good night with her friend, dancing in the kitchen and making a TikTok. However, at one point, Caitlin and her friend heard knocking on a window. According to the friend, Caitlin then walked over to the window, looked outside, and claimed, "What are you doing here?" After that, 2 to 3 gunshots rang out, with the bullets piercing Caitlin, killing her. The man who murdered Caitlin was her 25-year-old ex-boyfriend, a man named Joshua Thompson. The two had dated in the past, but friends and family members said that their relationship was incredibly toxic. In fact, in April of 2024, the police were called after Joshua beat Caitlin so badly that she was covered with bruises all over her body. Immediately after killing Caitlin, Joshua ran from the scene and called his brother, crying. And he immediately confessed to shooting his ex-girlfriend in the head and killing her. Sadly, in the past, a no-contact order had been filed against Joshua, basically a restraining order to keep him away from his ex-girlfriend. But that did no good, and sadly, Caitlin ended up dead. This is so scary and a story that we hear time and time again. A woman who moves on with her life and a man who just can't let that woman go. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast that I co-host with my wife, Courtney, Murder in America. It's available on all streaming platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
He was found face down in a bath full of acid. It was January 2022 in North Parramatta in Australia. 20-year-old Miraj Zafar and 19-year-old Arnima Hayat had only been married a couple of months. Arnima was incredibly beautiful, as you can see, and also incredibly intelligent. She was in her second year of medical school and was working towards becoming a doctor. She was pregnant with her husband's child, and the future should have been bright. However, her life would be snatched away from her in the most horrific way. Now, the couple had got married in October 2021, just after police had to put in place an apprehended violence order in the May when Miraj had threatened to unalive her father. A horrendous incident had also taken place where he'd actually grabbed her round the neck when he believed he'd seen her with another man. Goes without saying that he was incredibly controlling towards her and would be verbally abusive a lot of the time. In texts, he called her a dumb bee and didn't allow her out of the house without his permission. She'd confided in a close friend that he was incredibly violent towards her and she was struggling to see a way out. However, she finally built up the courage to tell her husband how she felt and tell him that she wanted a divorce. Now, this was in January, and on the 29th of the month, Miraj texted his mum to make a horrific confession. He stated that the pair had been involved in an altercation and she, quote, had been knocked unconscious. His mum told him to ring an ambulance, but he refused. Shockingly, he stated, "I'm not going to call the ambulance, I'm scared. The police will get me and they will put me in jail." He then asked how much a ticket abroad would cost. Now, his mum actually thankfully took matters into her own hands and rang the police herself. Officers raced to the scene and had to force entry into the couple's apartment. This beautiful and bright young woman was discovered deceased, face down, partially submerged in acid. Miraj had killed her the day prior to texting his mum. He had then made numerous trips to the shop to try and get supplies to clean up. Horrifically, evidence from the scene showed that he had Googled, "How many years do you in Sydney get for murder?" He admitted to the killing and was given 21 years and 6 months in prison.
Seen a clip of this interviewer. He was interviewing some like indigenous tribe.
Okay.
And the interviewer asked them, "Have you ever heard about an alien? Do you know what an alien is?"
Okay.
They were like, "No, we've never heard about that term." And then the interviewer pulled up a picture. He's like, "This." He's like, "Oh yeah, the underground people.
Whoa, what the?
How they take souls underground." I'm gonna show you the interview right now, and he said a very specific name.
E alienígena não tem.
Como?
Alienígena.
Alienígena?
Essa palavra você nunca ouviu falar? Alienígena.
Alienígena, não. Isso chama-se Mayushibu.
Isso
Moishibu?
aqui?
Sim.
Mancunawabu.
Mancunawabu.
Sério?
Mancunawabu é um que
Mancunawabu.
mora debaixo da terra.
É, eu falei, esse aí.
Que se virou formiga hoje, que nós chamamos Una, que é uma formiga grande, chama-se Mancunawabu.
Mancunawabu.
Que essa formiga também é muito perigosa, né, Bruno? Se as pessoas ficam mexendo com ela demais, ela leva o espírito da pessoa para debaixo da terra também.
Ah,
What
Tá
the
bem,
fuck?
é bem bom.
São seres que pode aparecer em luz divina, com luz do Nishpa. São seres que a gente pode ter o contato, que moram debaixo da terra.
Yo, first of all, shout out to the interviewer, bro. Whatever language that is, bro,
Yeah.
it's good.
So I guess they're Brazilian indigenous people
Bro.
from the Amazon rainforest.
And
This man was attacked, suffocated, and swallowed alive by a 23-foot-long python. Akbar Salubrio was just a 25-year-old man when he left his home to harvest palm oil and never returned. The villagers grew worried when night came and Akbar was nowhere to be seen. His motorcycle was abandoned near the plantation, but there was no sign of him anywhere. Then, 2 days later, they noticed something terrifying. Near the plantation, a massive 23-foot-long python lay still. Its belly grotesquely swollen, and it looked like it swallowed something huge. The villagers feared the worst, and with knives in hand, they cut into the snake's belly. And what they found inside was horrifying. Akbar's lifeless body was curled inside the serpent's stomach, fully intact, still dressed in his boots and clothes. The snake had attacked, constricted, and swallowed him whole. Something almost never witnessed with adult humans. This was not just a nightmare. It was real. Videos and pictures were taken of the entire process of people retrieving Akbar's body from the python, and they are absolutely disturbing. This is the first confirmed case of a snake killing and consuming an adult. This has to be one of the most terrifying deaths ever recorded.
I come here twice a week in the morning just for their breakfast burritos, which are
On the morning of April 22nd, 2024, a 10-year-old boy in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma called the police. And this 10-year-old boy told the police dispatcher that his 3 brothers and his mother and father were all dead. On the night before, John Candy, the boy's father, had gotten into an altercation with his mother, Lindsay. This caused John to snap and shoot and kill his wife. Afterwards, John then turned the gun on his young children. And as the police described, he, quote, systematically went through the home, shooting and killing the children. The police sergeant who spoke on the record also stated that, quote, those children were hunted down and killed, end quote. The victims included 18-year-old Dylan, 14-year-old Ethan, and 12-year-old Lucas. But the Candy's 10-year-old son slept through the murders, and it's unknown exactly why John skipped over killing him. From the outside looking in, everybody said that the Candy family was practically perfect, that John, the father, was your average goofy dad. And all the pictures that they took and posted seemed to show this. It's also eerie because John and his wife Lindsay, who he would go on to murder before killing himself, appeared on a local news segment shortly before the murders, talking about how much they loved a local eatery. But this is just a horrible situation and a story that I feel like we hear far too often in America. And the motive behind this crime is still unknown. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast that I co-host with my wife, Courtney, Murder in America. It's available on all streaming platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
This is like the UK version of the Chris Watts case. What happened to this amazing mum and her beautiful little girls is an absolute tragedy. Kelly Fitzgibbons was born in 1979 in Chichester in the UK. She had a twin sister, Emma, and the pair absolutely loved their childhood. They were completely best friends. They had loads of fun being identical twins and kind of like regularly pranking people and swapping identities. Now, Kelly had a great sense of humor and kept the family laughing even through their darkest times. When Kelly and Emma were just 15 years old, their mum Janice passed away. This brought them even closer together and also closer to their dad, who really struggled with this. Fast forward to Kelly turning 26, she met Rob Needham, and he seemed kind of like a shy guy, but he was quite practical, he was hands-on, and he seemed like a decent partner to Kelly. The pair ended up living in a stunning house together in West Sussex. Now, Kelly always wanted to be a mum, so she was over the moon when she became pregnant with her eldest daughter, Ava. A couple of years after that, she had beautiful little Lexi too. The family seemed complete. The girls were Kelly's absolute world, and Rob seemed to take okay to being a dad too. There was never any kind of warning signs that he was struggling. One thing that people did notice though was how unbothered Rob seemed to be, just in general life. He was always kind of tired. He didn't really seem to make much effort. He once told one of his friends that he felt his life was boring, and in hindsight, this may have been a clue as to his mental state. When Ava was just a month old, Rob applied for a gun license. On the forms, he actually lied, and he denied ever having a history of any convictions or any mental health issues. Actually been cautioned for a theft and had a long history of suffering with depression. At the start of March 2020, the UK went into lockdown. On the 27th of the month, Kelly posted lovely pictures on social media that the family had been for a nice group walk all together. Now, it looked really lovely and picturesque, just the perfect family unit. The following day, they would all be dead. It was Saturday the 28th at around 7 p.m, and Kelly and her sister were texting each other as normal, just having kind of like a funny chat about a video online. Suddenly, Kelly stopped replying. Now, Kelly and Rob had had a Chinese delivered to them and watched TV. It seemed like a very typical Saturday night. At some point after 9 p.m. that night, Rob retrieved his weapon and put his horrific plan in motion. Ava and Lexi were tragically found the following day, cuddled up in their pajamas in bed with fatal gunshot wounds. They'd been shot at close range. Kelly had seemingly tried to rush to her children after they'd been shot. Kelly had also been shot in the back of the head at close range, and the family dog was also deceased. Rob was lying in the family home with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. It turned out that Rob had had a chronic C addiction that he'd hidden from absolutely everybody. Kelly's devastated family presumed that in order to commit such a hideous, hideous crime, Rob would have had to be completely smashed. You know, he was maybe on substances or had drank a lot. However, the post-mortem concluded that he was not under the influence of anything that night. When investigators looked into the texts between the couple prior to the tragedy, it painted a more vivid picture of what was actually going on. Now, I've actually gone into a lot more detail in my podcast, The Bourne Investigation, about all of the text messages and what we kind of know from Rob's history. But pretty much, Kelly seemed to be constantly trying to get hold of Rob and trying to encourage him to be honest with her. In one text, she stated, "It doesn't feel natural when we're together," and expressed her worries about the relationship. Rob also seemed to have money. He was over £25,000 in debt. As well as this, police uncovered a text off Kelly to Rob asking for the pair on a break. Shortly after, Rob went and bought the weapon. On the evening of the murders, Rob sent a message to one of his friends just before midnight, and it was basically a pretty sick joke. As I said, I go into more of these details in my podcast, but it was basically a joke referencing a man kind of unaliving his wife. It's not known whether Rob sent this prior to killing his family or after. He didn't leave a note, and Kelly's family really struggled to this day to make sense of what happened. Like I said, for a thorough deep dive, head over to my podcast, The Bourne Investigation, on Spotify or Apple Podcasts.
I will die on the hill that this man did not end his own life. In April of 2003, Colonel Philip Michael Shue kissed his wife goodbye, left for work, and 2 hours later was killed in a violent car accident. But this wasn't a typical car accident because he had been severely mutilated prior to his crash. Both of his nipples had been surgically removed, as well as a portion of his ear and pinky. Yet authorities quickly ruled his death a suicide. The circumstances surrounding this case and the details leading up to Philip's death are genuinely horrifying. So Let's talk about it. Colonel Philip Michael Shue was a really intelligent man who eventually entered the United States Air Force and became a well-regarded psychiatrist. In 1988, Philip was stationed at the Eglin Air Force Base in Florida when he met his future wife, Tracy, who was an Air Force nurse at the base. At the time, Philip was going through a nasty divorce from his first wife, Nancy, and although he didn't talk much about her, he did say that there was just no love in that relationship. So needless to say, when the divorce was finalized in 1993, he was really excited, and it was at this point that he and Tracy decided to get married. Fast forward to 5 years later. In 1998, Philip was reassigned to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. But in April of 2003, Philip decided that it was time to retire from the Air Force. He planned to finish up some last-minute work, and by September, the two would move to Birmingham, Alabama to their dream home. They had just put down the deposit to secure the house, and they were so excited. But on the morning of April 16th, 2003, a series of mysterious events would occur that would change their lives forever. The morning started out just like any other. Philip got dressed in his military fatigues and brought Tracy her routine cup of coffee in bed. Philip said that he had to get to work a little earlier than usual to finish up some paperwork, so at 5:30 a.m., he kissed his wife goodbye, told her he loved her, and headed out for work. But 2 hours came and went, and he never made it into his office, which was only 30 miles away, and nobody would know what happened to him until they found his crashed car, with him deceased inside of it. At around 8:14 that morning, 2 witnesses saw Philip's tan Mercury Tracer swerve onto the median of Interstate 10 just outside of San Antonio. His car then drove for about 1,500 feet, going about 60 miles per hour, and at one point he even became airborne before slamming back down onto the highway. Philip was then seen driving safely for several miles before veering off the side of the road, crashing into a cluster of oak trees. When authorities arrived on scene, they found Philip dressed in his military fatigues. His car was completely caved in on the driver's side, and he suffered massive head injuries, and he appeared to have died on impact. But this is where things start to get really strange. Philip had no wallet or ID on him, and upon looking closer, authorities found that his body had been severely mutilated prior to the crash. The t-shirt Philip was wearing under his military clothes had been cut open from his chest to his belly button, and under that was a 6-inch vertical gash on his chest. Both of his nipples had been surgically removed, and not only that, but his left pinky and part of his earlobe had been amputated, and all of those body parts were never found. Authorities then found that both of Philip's wrists and his boots had been wrapped in duct tape, as if he had been bound at one point but broken loose. So Philip was found dead at around 8:30 in the morning, but his wife Tracy wasn't actually notified about his death until 7 hours later, when the sheriff and a minister arrived at her home. And when they did notify her, they conveniently left out the part where her husband had been mutilated. It wasn't until a worker with the Department of Public Safety arrived at her home a few hours later that Tracy noticed something wasn't quite right. The worker blurted something out that made Tracy stop in her tracks. He said, quote, "Oh, by the way, is there any reason your husband would have duct tape around his wrists and ankles?" End quote. And that's when Tracy remembered something that would turn this investigation upside down. In the years prior to his death, Philip began receiving a series of letters warning him that his life may be in danger. In the letters, an unknown person writes to Philip stating that a friend of theirs overheard Philip's ex-wife Nancy and her current husband wishing he was dead so that they could collect on his life insurance. To kind of back up, as part of Philip and Nancy's divorce settlement, Nancy had received the right to own his life insurance policies, which totaled $1 million. Over the years following the divorce, Philip begged Nancy to cancel the policies, but she would always tell him no and that she just couldn't afford to. So once he received these letters, Philip actually wrote to Nancy and confronted her about the warnings, but she of course denied any involvement, and she said she had no clue what he was talking about. According to Tracy, these letters really scared Philip, and after each letter, he became more and more scared for his life. He gave these letters to his superiors in the Air Force, but they concluded that they didn't actually hold any harm or danger and told him to basically just ignore them. He even reached out to the insurance companies, which were USAA and Northwestern Mutual, and asked them to cancel the policies. But they always responded that since Nancy was the owner of the policies, she had total authority over them. But like I said, Philip was terrified for his life, and he even started experiencing panic attacks. So he eventually wrote a letter to the insurance companies and said, quote, "Thoroughly examine my death for evidence of foul play, even if on the surface the cause would appear natural or accidental." End quote. But despite all of this pleading, the insurance companies still refused to cancel the policies. So when asked if there would be any reason why Philip's wrists and ankles may have been wrapped in duct tape, Tracy's first thought was the threatening letters and handed them over to the police. She let them search the property for clues and hoped that in doing so, something would come of it. But unfortunately, it didn't. But get this, it wasn't even until a month after Philip's funeral that Tracy learned he had been mutilated. And the only reason she found out was because a reporter somehow found out and asked her about it. But after learning this information, it reassured Tracy that Philip didn't die accidentally. He was murdered, and it was somehow connected to those letters. During the investigation, an autopsy was conducted by the Bexar County Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Vincent DeMaio, and his findings only bring more questions. A small amount of white fiber material consistent with that of a diaper was found on Philip's groin area. Also found in that same area was a little tab with a cartoon figure of a sun and moon, which is also consistent with a tab from a diaper. But Philip obviously didn't wear diapers, and nowhere in the car was a diaper found. So how that material got on him is still a mystery. A high concentration of lidocaine, which is an anesthetic, was found in Philip's blood, and originally it was thought to have come from a cream that would be rubbed onto the skin. However, there is usually another ingredient in that cream that would also show in the toxicology, but it didn't. So somehow prior to his death, Philip was injected with lidocaine. But despite all of that, after 1 year of investigating, the local and state police and the Air Force all concluded that Philip ended his own life. They labeled Philip's death a suicide, more specifically a bizarre psychological breakdown. The medical examiner officially ruled that despite the odd mutilations on Philip's body, there were no wounds identified as being consistent with a struggle. He, along with the Air Force and state police, believe 100% that the injuries found on Philip's chest were self-inflicted. One of the reasons they feel this way is because Philip reportedly didn't try calling for help that day. Philip's phone was found in the car at the scene of the crash, but according to phone records, he never actually made a call on his phone after the mutilation. This narrative was really pushed that there was no evidence that he tried to call for help, but that's not entirely true. After the crash, and for reasons unknown, Philip's phone was given to his and Tracy's neighbor before being given back to her. And according to them, there was a large amount of blood on the inside of the phone, almost as if he had held the phone up to his partially amputated ear and tried to call for help. What is odd that I think should be pointed out is that the exact location that Philip was driving before he crashed was technically away from help. He was driving away from San Antonio and a few hospitals and police stations, and he actually passed a state trooper on the highway. Philip also passed 3 exits to his home in Boerne, and why he didn't stop, no one knows. Authorities believe that he injected himself with lidocaine to avoid feeling the pain of mutilating his own body. According to them, hesitation marks were found next to the gaping wound on Philip's chest, which to them indicate that the injuries were self-inflicted. But Tracy and even Philip's commanding officer believe that he did not end his own life, and instead was abducted and tortured, and that he accidentally crashed the car, which resulted in his death when trying to escape. 2 months after Philip's death, Tracy filed a civil lawsuit against Nancy and the 2 insurance companies in hopes of preventing Nancy from being able to collect on Philip's $1 million life insurance payout. Nancy has denied any involvement in Philip's death, and although she did refuse to take a polygraph test, she told authorities that on the day of Philip's death, she and her current husband could prove that they were at work in Florida. It wasn't made public if this was ever confirmed, but I have to assume it was. One thing that I wanted to note is that Tracy believes that the nature of Philip's injuries could be a clue. His injuries could be classified as sexual in nature, and court documents show that Nancy was a board-certified sex therapist who also studied the practice of sadomasochism. Tracy has gone on record saying Philip never had any sort of fetish like this, but I just wanted to mention this because it will pop up when you research this case. Because of how many people pushed to have Philip's death reinvestigated, his case was actually brought to a jury of 12 people. But given the evidence, they all concluded that the suicide ruling should stand. But Tracy still didn't believe this, so she went on to hire an independent forensic pathologist to complete a second autopsy with fresh eyes. And after investigating the case, they concluded that the evidence presented in the initial autopsy does not support suicide, but rather it's suggestive that another person may have been involved in Philip's death. They noted that there were no fingerprints on any of the duct tape found on Philip, which indicates that another person was involved. They also brought up the fact that no cutting instrument was found in the car that was responsible for Philip's injuries. Additionally, Philip's wallet and ID, his nipples, his left pinky, and part of his earlobe were never found, leading the pathologist to believe that this trauma occurred somewhere outside of the vehicle and that another person caused it. What's extremely odd is that this pathologist found no record logged by the original medical examiner of there being an injection site anywhere on Philip's body. The lidocaine would have had to be injected into each nipple and in the middle of his chest, but the original medical examiner didn't identify any of that. And although there was a high concentration of lidocaine found in his blood, it wasn't high enough to numb himself from the pain, which almost disproves the theory that Philip numbed himself before mutilating his own body. 2 years after Philip's death, the military issued a 20-page report and called it a psychological autopsy. In it, they basically just reiterate all of the findings from the previous investigation into the case. Their conclusion was that Philip had become paranoid, depressed, and irrational in the months leading up to his death, and they all agreed that his death should still be labeled a suicide. They also cited that there was no evidence of another person being involved, but there is one person that disagrees with this finding, someone very important, and that is Philip's own psychiatrist. Like I mentioned earlier, once Philip began receiving those warning letters, he became scared for his life and developed major anxiety as a result. So he started seeing a psychiatrist for treatment. In his psychiatrist's own words, he strongly disagrees that Philip ended his own life. According to him, Philip was prescribed these 2 drugs at the time of his death, which could result in suicidal tendencies, but neither of those drugs were found in his system during the autopsy, which means at some point well before his death, he stopped taking them. He mentioned that Philip was responding really well to treatment, and he never showcased any suicidal ideations. He was very much looking forward to the next chapter of his life after retirement. One thing that is really odd, though, is that 6 months before Philip's death, he told his psychiatrist about a disturbing nightmare he had. In the nightmare, he was in his car, which went out of control on the way to work, and great violence was done to him. Because authorities wouldn't investigate deeper, Tracy hired a private investigator to look into Philip's case. During his investigation, the PI found that the lead investigator on the case didn't even preserve the scene of the crash or Philip's vehicle. And after interviewing him, the lead investigator on the case stated that despite the mutilations to Philip's body, quote, the situation wasn't handled as if it had been a crime scene. I am guilty. I was in charge of the investigation. There is a lot of fault to go around, but in the end, it's mine. Evidence may have been lost. Leads may have been ignored. There was no investigation. End quote. The PI also found and interviewed the 2 witnesses that saw Philip crash that morning. According to them, they were never even contacted by Air Force investigators. Because of all of his findings, the PI strongly believes that Philip was murdered. Following Tracy's lawsuit, in June of 2008, Nancy received $1 million and Tracy ended up receiving $1.8 million. During the trial for that, the judge did something that made Tracy's jaw drop. He announced to the courtroom that based on the evidence considered by the court, Colonel Philip Michael Shue was murdered, therefore finding that his April 16th, 2003 death was actually a homicide. Finally, after all of these years, someone with power agreed that all of the evidence points to him being murdered. So you would think that that would be a good thing, but unfortunately it wasn't. Despite the judge's order to reopen the case and change Philip's death certificate from suicide to homicide, Kendall County officials refused to do so. Kendall County officials have publicly stated that they have no plans to reinvestigate this case. And sadly, in 2009, the Texas Attorney General officially ruled that Philip's death certificate does not have to be changed. And to this day, Philip's official cause of death remains suicide. So even though you have all of these people saying that Philip's death was not a suicide, authorities have chosen to not reinvestigate Philip's death. This has left many people wondering what really happened to Colonel Philip Michael Shue and why it seems like it's being covered up. Law enforcement has never named Nancy, or anyone for that matter, as a suspect or person of interest in this case. Some believe that Philip staged the attack and just accidentally killed himself, but others believe that he was abducted, taken to a second location, tortured, and died while trying to get away. It's now been 22 years, and although what exactly happened to Philip that day remains a mystery, I think we can all agree that it was sinister.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Smart Schoolboy 9, and I'm not gonna lie, bro, this has to be one of the weirdest shit, most disturbing rabbit holes since like Daily Capper, bro, Pipergate, Elsa Gate. It's basically this guy, he lives in the UK and he's posting on Instagram himself dressing up as a child and pretending to be a child. All of this started because Reddit users, they were coming across these random ass reels and posts. It was of multiple Instagram accounts that looked similar to him, but it had like actual kids, but it looked like their faces were AI. It looked like they had a makeup on with big lips, red lipstick, and they would always wear black heels and black leather mini boots. But the kids will always be in poses. So it's basically borderline. All these accounts are all ran by Smart Schoolboy 9. And there's multiple accounts, there's OD accounts, bro. And I've seen screenshots of those pages and that Smart Schoolboy 9 commenting under real life kids posts and shit, bro.
It's already making me feel weird, bro. Like,
he would also post videos of himself, and there's one video in particular, he's looking at himself in the mirror and he's basically getting off the fact that he's a kid. It has to do with some weird fetish that he's obsessed with. Basically, the other accounts are like, in a way, kind of outing himself by pretending to be somebody good, exposing these. But he's him. Exactly.
As of right now, hasn't been no confirmed.
From what we know, there's no.
Well, there's victims because he definitely like got pictures from somewhere and shit like that.
Just reminded me, bro. There's a video of him chasing an actual kid.
You're lying.
I'm being so serious.
Nah, bro. Nah. Yo, you know how fast that motherfucker would have gone?
I don't ever slow up. No, I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got